Okay, I want to start today with a moment that I think a lot of you are going to recognize. One spouse is saying, I'm trying, I'm changing, I'm doing the work. I am not the same person I was 6 months ago. Why can't you see that? And the other spouse is sitting across from them, or maybe on the other side of the couch, or even in a different room entirely, thinking, I want to believe you, I really do. But I don't know if I can trust this yet. I don't know if this is real. I don't know if this is going to last. And I don't know if I am safe enough to let my guard down. Both people here are hurting. One person feels unseen in their effort, like they're working so hard and it's just not registering. And the other person feels unsafe trusting too quickly. Like if they soften, they're going to get blindsided again. And here's what happens when you don't understand what's actually going on underneath that dynamic. You end up in this really painful cycle where one spouse keeps trying harder and harder to prove that they have changed, and the other spouse keeps feeling more and more pressured to believe something they have not actually experienced yet. And then both people start to shut down. The one trying starts to feel hopeless, like nothing they do will ever be enough. And the one guarding starts to feel guilty, like maybe they are the problem. Maybe they are being too hard. Maybe they're punishing. So today I want to talk about what is actually happening in that cycle. And more importantly, I want to give you both a way through it. Because this is not a one-sided episode. I'm not just talking to the spouse who is trying to change, and I'm not just talking to the spouse who has been hurt. I'm talking to both of you because both sides of this matter deeply. Hey there, welcome to the Focus Podcast with Taralee. This is the place where we talk about real life, real relationships, and how to grow through it all. If you're looking for simple mindset shifts, better communication, and deeper connections, you're in the right spot. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Focus Podcast. I'm Taralee Eddington, marriage crisis coach and creator of the Focus Framework, and this is the place where we talk about healing relationships, rebuilding emotional safety, and learning how to show up with more clarity, ownership, and real connection in the marriages and relationships that matter the most to you. So if you are new here, welcome. I'm so glad you found this. And if you have been here for a while, you already know we don't do surface level here. We get into the real stuff. And today's episode is about as real as it gets, because what I'm going to talk about today is one of the most frustrating and heartbreaking dynamics that I see in marriage crisis. The gap between someone trying to change and their spouse actually being able to feel safe with that change. That gap is real, and it's not always about effort. Sometimes the effort is genuinely there. The growth is genuinely happening, and the spouse on the receiving end still cannot feel it. And that's not because they're broken or cruel or punishing, it's because trust does not work that way. So let's talk about that. This is often a turning point in marriage crisis where one spouse finally sees it. Maybe it happens in a therapy session. Maybe it happens after their spouse finally says the thing that they've been holding for years and it lands differently this time. Maybe it happens at 2 a.m. when they can't sleep and they are just lying there thinking about the last 10 conversations that they've had. And then they realize for the first time the pattern that they have been playing. They see how defensive they have been. They recognize how much they have minimized their spouse's pain, or maybe how much they have criticized or avoided or pursued in ways that push the other person further away, or maybe shut down completely when things got hard. They finally see that their spouse has been lonely, maybe for a long time. And when that moment happens, it's significant. And I want to say that clearly. When someone is finally willing to look honestly at themselves, that matters, and that is hard to do. A lot of people never get there, but here's where it gets tricky. The person who had just had that awakening, they want the relationship to start feeling better right now. Not in 6 months, not after a year of consistency, right now. They want their spouse to see that they see it. They want to say, I get it now. I know what I was doing, and I know I hurt you, and I'm working on it. I promise I'm working on it. And underneath all of that is this very human, very understandable need for some kind of sign that that effort is landing. They want their spouse to soften just a little. They want their spouse to notice. They want hope. And I'm not saying that that is wrong. That makes complete sense. Of course you want to know that the work you're doing is making a difference. But the spouse on the receiving end of this, they may not be ready to give that sign yet. Not because they're trying to punish and not because they want their partner to suffer, not because they've already decided that it's over, but because trust does not rebuild at the pace of insight. It rebuilds at the pace of experience. And that is a really important distinction that I want to just sit with for a moment here. Your spouse did not lose trust in you overnight. They lost it over dozens, maybe hundreds of moments where the pattern repeated, where they hoped things would be different and they weren't, where they tried to say something and it went sideways, where they needed something and you weren't available in the way that they needed, whether you knew that or not. That kind of trust does not reverse because you finally see it. It reverses because they start to feel something different. And feeling something different takes time and takes consistency. Okay, so let's get really specific about this because this is where I think a lot of couples get stuck and I want to name it differently. You are trying. I believe you. You are reading the books. You're listening to podcasts, including this one. You are in coaching or therapy. You are genuinely attempting to pause before reacting. You are genuinely trying not to get defensive. You are trying to be more present, more patient, more honest, more available. That effort is real, and I'm not dismissing it. But your spouse may still feel guarded. And when that happens, your brain is going to offer you a story about what that means, that they don't care, that they're never going to forgive me, that nothing I do is ever going to be enough. They have already made up their mind. And from that story, you're going to feel desperate. You're going to feel anxious and maybe even hopeless. And from that feeling, you may start looking for reassurance. Are we okay? Do you see how hard I'm trying? I'm doing everything right and you're still pulling away. I don't know what else you want from me. And here is what happens in that moment. Even if it sounds like sharing, even if it sounds like vulnerability, it lands as pressure because underneath the question is a need. And the need is, tell me this is working. Tell me you believe me. Tell me I'm enough. And your spouse, who is still trying to figure out whether it is safe to trust your change, now feels responsible for managing your fear. And that is not safety. That's a version of the old pattern in a new outfit. And I want to be really gentle here because I know this can be hard to hear. You are not doing this on purpose. You're scared, and your fear is understandable. But the fear is pointing to something important. What if your effort is still about you? What if underneath the growth, there's still a part of you that's changing because you want the marriage to feel better, not because you want to become a different person regardless of outcome? And I'm not saying you're wrong for wanting the marriage to feel better. That's completely valid to want. But your spouse can feel the difference between you changing for your own integrity and you changing to get a result. And one of those things is safe to trust, and the other is not, because it means the change might stop when the result does not come. And that is what their nervous system is trying to figure out. Now, let me speak directly to the spouse who is trying to change. Your spouse's guardedness probably feels like rejection. I know it probably does, because when you reach out, they pull back. When you try to connect, they stay cool. When you offer something and they just don't respond the way that you had hoped, your brain is going to tell you that that means something terrible. They don't see me. They don't care. They've already checked out. They just want to punish me, and they're never going to let this go. I want you to slow that down. What if their guardedness is not rejection? What if their guardedness is protection? What if they're not trying to dismiss your change? What if they are genuinely trying to figure out whether it is safe to trust it? Because those are completely different things. When someone has been hurt repeatedly in a relationship, not just once, but in a pattern that played out over months or even years, their nervous system does not get the memo just because their partner has new insight. Their nervous system is not convinced by announcements, and it's not convinced by promises, and it's not even fully convinced by apologies. It's convinced by repeated experiences over time. Your spouse needs to see what you do when you're frustrated, and the old version of you would have snapped. They need to see what you would do when they are still hurt, and the old version of you would have gotten defensive. They need to see what you do when they do not immediately reassure you, and the old version of you would have escalated or shut down. They need to experience that your growth does not depend on them rewarding it. That is where change becomes real to them. Not when you explain it, not when you make a case for it, but when they live through a moment where the old pattern could have taken over and it doesn't. That's the evidence that actually lands. Now I want to turn and talk to the spouse who has been on the receiving end of the pattern, the one who's felt dismissed or minimized, ignored, criticized, betrayed, or just quietly exhausted for a long time. I want to start by saying your guardedness makes complete sense. You don't have to defend it to me. Caution after being hurt is not a character flaw, it's wisdom. You don't have to force yourself to trust something your body does not feel safe trusting yet. You don't have to perform healing to make your spouse feel better about their growth. And you don't have to rush your timeline. And also, I want to say this with real care because your pain needs a place to go that doesn't keep both of you permanently locked in the same cycle. Because here's something I see in my work that's hard to talk about, but really important. Sometimes the hurt spouse becomes so focused on protecting themselves, which again makes sense, but they stop being able to recognize real change when it starts to happen. Every effort gets filtered through that old story. They're only doing this because I threatened to leave. This is temporary. As soon as things feel normal again, they'll go back to who they were. They're saying all the right things, but I know who they really are. They're doing this to manipulate me, not because they actually changed. And I want to ask a question here. Is that discernment or is it suspicion? Because those two things feel similar from the inside, but they lead to completely different outcomes. Suspicion says, I already know the verdict. Nothing that happens can change it. But discernment says, I'm going to stay wise, I'm going to watch for consistency, and I'm going to let what actually happens inform what I believe. Suspicion protects you from being hurt, but it also makes it impossible for repair to happen because the evidence never gets to land. Everything becomes proof of the old story. Discernment protects you too, but it keeps a window open. Not wide open, not naive, just open. And the reason that this matters is not for your spouse's sake, it's for yours. Because if you stay in permanent suspicion, if you decide the outcome before the evidence comes in, you don't get to actually heal. You just stay in pain with a wall around it. And you deserve more than that. And that doesn't mean excusing what happened, and it doesn't mean pretending, and it doesn't mean the past gets erased. It means asking yourself honestly, am I observing what is happening now, or am I only seeing what happened before? This is a really brave question, and it's yours to sit with. Okay, this is the part of the episode that I most want you to remember. So if you've been half listening while you're driving or folding laundry, come back to me for this part. There is a difference between proving change and practicing change. And the difference matters more than almost anything else in a healing marriage. Proving change sounds like this. Look at how hard I'm trying. Why don't you believe me? I already apologized. What more do you want? You keep bringing up the past. I'm not that person anymore. I don't know what else I can possibly do. Nothing I do is ever enough for you. Now, does any of that sound familiar? Be honest, because proving is really common, and it comes from a real place. It comes from fear and from exhaustion and from genuine frustration that the effort is not translating. But here's the problem with proving. Proving is focused on you, on being believed, on getting credit, on getting relief from the discomfort of being mistrusted. It's not focused on your spouse. It's not focused on their healing. It's not focused on creating an environment where they can actually feel safe. And your spouse's nervous system knows the difference. Practicing change sounds completely different. Practicing change sounds like, I understand why this still hurts. I know one apology does not erase a pattern that built up over years. I'm not going to pressure you to trust me before you're ready. I want to become someone consistent, not just someone convincing. I can hear your pain right now without needing to defend myself. I can take responsibility for my part without collapsing into shame or needing you to rescue me from it. I can give you space right now without turning cold or distant or resentful. Do you feel the difference? Proving asks for credit. Practicing builds safety. Proving is focused on being believed. Practicing is focused on becoming believable. Proving comes from fear. Practicing comes from commitment. And I want to say something about that last one. Fear-based change is fragile. It tends to hold up when things are good and fall apart under pressure. It depends on getting a certain response to sustain itself. Commitment-based change is different. It holds up even when it's not rewarded, even when your spouse is still hurting, even when the relationship still feels uncertain. It holds up because it's rooted in who you are becoming, not in what you are getting. And that is the version of change that your spouse's nervous system can eventually begin to trust. Not because you convinced them, but because they experienced it. Okay, here is something I want both of you to hear, because this is the thing that actually moves the needle. In marriage crisis, the problem is almost never just one conversation. It's almost never just one incident. It's a pattern. One person pursues, the other withdraws. One person criticizes, the other defends. One person shuts down, the other escalates. One person feels unheard, the other feels attacked. One person wants closeness, the other needs space. And both people start protecting themselves. And the more they protect themselves, the less safe the relationship becomes. And the less safe it becomes, the more they protect themselves. This is the cycle. And the reason it is so hard to break is that each person's protective behavior makes complete sense given what the other person is doing. You are not crazy for shutting down when you feel attacked. You're not crazy for chasing when you feel abandoned. These responses are logical, but they are keeping you stuck. So if you want the marriage to change, not just feel better for a week, but actually change, the pattern has to change. Not just the words, not just the apologies, not just the promises, the pattern. And patterns change through repeated moments where one or both spouses choose something different. One spouse feels the urge to explain themselves, and instead they say, "Tell me more about what that was like for you." The other spouse feels the urge to assume the worst, and instead they slow down and wait to see what actually happens. One spouse wants to chase reassurance, and instead they go clean the kitchen and let that be enough. The other spouse wants to dismiss every gesture, and instead they say thank you and let themselves notice it without needing to decide what that means. Those moments are small, but they add up. And over time, they begin to create a relationship that feels a little different, a little safer, a little more like something both people can stay in without bracing for impact. Okay, let's get practical now, because I know some of you are listening to this and thinking, this all sounds right, but what do I actually do differently in the moment? And this is where my focus framework comes in. Focus stands for facts first, own your thoughts, choose your feelings, understand your actions, shape your results. And I want to walk you through exactly how this plays out in a real moment for both spouses. Let's say it's a Tuesday evening, you've had a hard day, and you're trying. You come home and your spouse is quiet at dinner. They're not cold exactly, but they're not warm either. They're just quiet. If you are the spouse trying to rebuild trust, your brain is going to immediately start generating a story. They're pulling away again. We had a good weekend and now this. Nothing I do lasts. They don't want to be here. I need to fix this right now. And from that story, you're going to feel anxious. You're going to feel panicked, maybe even desperate. And from that panic, you're going to want to do something. Are we okay? You seem distant. What's wrong? I feel like every time things start to get better, you pull away. I've been trying so hard. Can you just tell me if it's working? Now, here is what focus does. It slows that moment down before it becomes a conversation that sets you both back. You say to yourself, fact, my spouse is quiet. Just that. Just the fact, not the story, not the interpretation, the fact. Thought, my brain is telling me this means something bad, that the connection we had this weekend is gone, that nothing I do sticks. Okay, you notice the thought, you don't have to believe it yet. So the feeling is I feel scared, I feel anxious, I feel the urge to reach for reassurance. You name the feeling, you don't act from it yet. The action I want to take is I want to ask a string of questions until they reassure me. And the result of that action is that my spouse feels pressured. I feel temporarily relieved, but then guilty, and we're back in the pattern. So you pause and you choose something different. Maybe you say, hey, I'm here if you want to talk. I'm going to go clean the kitchen. And then you get up and you go clean the kitchen and let that be enough. That's practicing change. That's what it actually looks like on a Tuesday evening moment. Now, if you're the spouse who has been hurt, your brain is going to generate its own story when they say something like that. They're being nice because they want something. This is what the calm feels like before the storm. The last time they acted like this, 2 weeks later, we were right back where we started. And if I let my guard down, I'm going to be hurt again. And from that story, you feel guarded. You feel tense, maybe even suspicious. And from that feeling, you might dismiss the gesture. You might give a cold one-word response. You might make a comment that lets them know that you're not buying it. And then they feel discouraged and the pattern edges forward. But with focus, the fact is that they offered to clean up the kitchen and said that they're here if you want to talk. Just that. Just what actually happened. But the thought is my brain is telling me this is temporary, that it doesn't mean anything, that I shouldn't trust this. Okay, so you notice the thought, but you don't have to act on it yet. Because the feeling is that I feel guarded, I feel tired, I feel a little bit of something that might be relief, but I'm afraid to let it be. And the action I want to take is I want to dismiss it or make a comment that protects me. And the result is I stay protected, but I also stay closed. And I don't actually find out whether things are changing. So instead, you might just say, thank you. That's it. That's all. You're not dropping your guard completely, and you're not pretending that everything's fine. You're not promising trust. You're just staying boundaried without being cruel. You're letting consistency have a chance to accumulate. That is your version of practicing change. And both of those things happening in the same moment, in the same kitchen, that is how the pattern starts to loosen. Not because either of you was perfect, but because both of you chose one thing differently. So what does emotional safety actually look and feel and sound like? And I want to spend some time here because I think emotional safety is one of the most misunderstood concepts in struggling marriages. A lot of people think emotional safety means no conflict, no hard conversations. One spouse just becomes easy to be around and the other spouse gradually comes back. And that is not what it is. Emotional safety is not the absence of difficulty. It's not walking on eggshells. It's not agreeing all the time or pretending the past didn't happen. Emotional safety is when I know that I can be honest with you and you won't punish me for it. It's when I can still be hurting and you will not rush me. It's when I take responsibility for something without being destroyed by shame because you're not weaponizing my accountability against me. It's when I can ask for space and you will not chase me or go cold. It's when I can ask for connection and you won't mock me or dismiss me. It's when I can make a mistake and we can repair. When I can hear hard feedback without immediately needing to defend myself. When I can have a boundary and hold it without becoming cruel. That is emotional safety. And here's what I want both of you to hear. Both of you are probably craving it right now. The spouse who has been hurt is craving safety from the old pattern. They want to stop bracing for impact. They want to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. They want to believe that what they feel and need actually matters. The spouse who is trying to change is craving safety too. Safety from constant rejection, from feeling like they are permanently defined by who they were at their worst moment, from the hopelessness of wondering if anything they do will ever be enough. But both of those needs are real, and both of them deserve to be honored. But here's the thing. Safety does not get created by waiting for the other person to change first. It doesn't come from demanding that your spouse prove their trustworthiness before you offer anything. And it doesn't come from working hard and expecting your spouse to meet you where you are. It comes from each person asking themselves the same question. What is mine to own right now? Not what should they be doing, not what are they failing at, not why are they wrong, just what is mine? That question is where your power actually lives. Now, I always want to give you something concrete before we close, because insight without action is just a really good conversation you had with yourself. So here's what I want each of you to actually practice this week. If you are the spouse who is trying to rebuild trust, this week I want you to practice what I call staying in your lane. Each time you feel the urge to ask your spouse to validate your change, stop. Notice the urge, name it, and redirect it. Ask yourself, can I stay steady right now even if they are still unsure? Can I listen to their pain without defending myself? Can I take ownership without immediately needing them to release me from it? Can I give them space tonight without turning cold or going silent in a punishing way? Can I keep doing this work because it reflects who I want to be, regardless of whether they acknowledge it today? That last question is really the important one, because when your consistency stops depending on their response, something shifts. Your spouse starts to notice that you're not doing this for them. You're doing it because you are changing, and that's the version of change that is actually safe to believe in. If you are the spouse who has been hurt, this week I want you to practice the difference between discernment and suspicion. At least once this week, when your spouse does something kind or different or that represents the change that they are working on, notice it. You don't have to announce it to them. You don't have to tell them that you noticed. You don't even have to soften or adjust anyway or anything outwardly. Just let yourself observe it without immediately explaining it away. Ask yourself, am I seeing what's actually happening right now? Or am I seeing the story that I built about who they are? Can I stay boundaried without being cruel? Can I acknowledge effort, even quietly, just to myself, without promising trust? What would it mean if this is actually changing? Am I willing to let that be possible? You don't owe anyone your trust before you are ready to give it, but you do owe yourself the chance to actually heal. And healing requires staying at least a little bit open to what is true right now. I want to be honest with you about something before we close. This work is genuinely hard to do without support. Not because you're weak and not because you're damaged, but because you're trying to change the pattern while you are still living inside the relationship that triggers it. So think about that for a second. You are trying to respond differently in the very moments when your nervous system is loudest, when your fear is most activated, when your old stories have the most evidence to draw from, when the story of this relationship is present in the room with you. And that is really hard. Your fear is loud. Your protective patterns are fast. And in that moment, you will almost always default to whatever kept you safe before, even if it's also what has been keeping you stuck. And that is why coaching and therapy and community matter, not as a last resort, but as a genuine investment in becoming someone different. Because you need a space to slow the pattern down before you are in it. You need a place to see your part clearly, not to shame yourself, but to understand yourself. You need a place to practice a new response before the next hard conversation happens. And you need someone who can help you see the difference between the story your fear is telling and what is actually true. And this is the work that I do with my clients. We use my focus framework to separate facts from story. We look at the thoughts that are driving the feelings, that are driving the actions that keep the cycle alive. And we practice. We actually practice different ways of showing up so that when the moment comes, you have somewhere to go besides the old pattern. If that's something you want to explore, I will have links in the show notes for how to work with me. So whether you're just starting to figure out where you are or whether you're ready to get into the real work, I would love to talk to you. Now, before I close, I want to bring us back to the heart of everything that I have said today. Most people in a marriage crisis are asking the wrong question. The spouse trying to change is asking, how do I get my spouse to believe that I have changed? And the hurt spouse is asking, how do I force myself to trust again? Both of those questions make sense, and both of them will keep you stuck. Here are the better questions. If you are trying to change, the better question is, how do I become consistent enough that my spouse can experience something different with me over time? Not how do I convince them, not how do I get credit, but how do I become the kind of person whose pattern speaks for itself? And if you're the spouse who has been hurt, the better question is, how do I stay wise and boundaried while also staying open to let reality in? Not how do I force trust, not how do I protect myself from everything, but how do I stay discerning without staying permanently closed? Those questions give both of you responsibility without blame. They make room for healing without rushing it. They honor pain without letting pain run the entire relationship. And they honor effort without demanding instant trust. That is where real repair has room to begin. So here is what I want you to take from this episode. You do not need to prove you have changed. You need to become safe to experience. And if you are the spouse who is guarded, you don't have to force trust before you're ready. But you do need to know the difference between protecting yourself and permanently closing yourself off. Because a hurting marriage does not heal through pressure. It doesn't heal through proving, and it doesn't heal through punishment, and it does not heal through one person doing everything while the other person watches from a safe distance indefinitely. It heals when the patterns start to change, one moment at a time, one pause at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one regulated response when everything in you wanted to react, one thank you when everything in you wanted to dismiss, one repair, imperfect, awkward, genuine, after something breaks. That is how emotional safety starts to come back. And emotional safety is where trust has room to grow. If this episode resonated with you, I would love if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who in your world is sitting in the middle of exactly this dynamic right now. And if you have not already, please subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for hanging out with me today on the Focus Podcast. If something stood out or helped you in some way, feel free to share it or leave a quick review. It means a lot. Keep showing up, keep growing, and I'll catch you in the next episode.